Members, the House is resumed. Before the dinner break, we were on the third reading of the Christian Churches New Zealand Property Trust Board Empowering Bill, and Brett Hudson was speaking and has 3 minutes, 56 seconds remaining if he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just before the break, I've got to say so much to say, so little time. Just before the break, I was drawing the parallel that had been raised in the Committee of the Whole about constraints when you have a certain fixed asset that you can use, and yet your desires and needs might better militate towards a different form of asset. And if one is in a position to transform an asset from one form into another, you can unlock all sorts of good potential. And this is the issue that was or is currently the case with this trust, but which we will address through the passage of this bill. And the parallel that was used in the Committee of the Whole was actually an item that this government, this party campaigned for in 2014 and then executed once re-elected, and that was the mixed ownership model, principally but not exclusively with our utilities companies. So the assets in many cases were fixed. They were generators, machinery, the ability to perform, to produce electricity, and yet there was a feeling as a government that we could deliver services to our citizens in other forms if only we could convert those assets from physical assets like real estate, Mr. Speaker, into other liquid assets like cash, which is precisely what we did by converting 49% of those physical fixed machinery assets into cash that is now being used for schools, for ultra-fast broadband, for roading, things that are providing services to citizens, unlocking potential across New Zealand. And that is precisely what this bill will enable the new trust to do with the assets, not only that they own today, but which they can then, should they choose to, convert some or all of to assets in other forms. So today we've said there was a very, very strong presumption that the funds they had to be held in real estate. This bill will enable them, should they choose to convert some or all of those into other assets. They could be cash assets, they could be other forms of machinery, they could be assets that will help them to deliver the services to their constituent parties, to the people in need, to the people that they have existed for so many decades to serve. I think it's an extraordinary, powerful thing, Mr. Speaker. It's something that I wholeheartedly endorse. I think the whole House actually, and the unanimous support for this bill, this whole House is supporting that. And I was hoping that there might just be an epiphany on the other side of the House that in doing what we're doing with this bill, thank you, permitting them to convert an asset into a more usable form, they might realise that what this government did with the mixed ownership model was indeed very powerful and enabling. I'll just move on to another part of this bill because I think it's very, very important. When we're changing one structure to another, that it does or could potentially introduce risks. So while we're transferring all of the properties, the rights and obligations, within that, we are being very careful to ensure that any actions that are underway or could otherwise have been placed under the old trust structure are still going to either be continued or still be available to parties who might wish to bring them under the new structure. So in that sense, nothing will have changed. And that has a couple of very important consequences. It does mean that the new trust will not be able to exit unfairly agreements it might have in place with suppliers that those suppliers are relying upon. It won't be able to introduce new performance criteria. But equally, the trust itself will be protected because those suppliers can't use this change as a vehicle to exit their contractual obligations to the previous trust. So I think it's an absolutely wonderful bill, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad it's going to be enacted, and I commend it to the House.
The member's time is